Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Near Memo today with Greg and Mike and our super special, exciting guest, Greg Gifford. Greg with two G's as opposed to my Greg with one G. Is that correct,
Well,
Greg?
only two G's if you count my last initial. Like Greg is just Greg, same as Greg. So we have two Gregs.
Oh, I thought you were G-R-E-G-G.
No, a lot of people think that because when you say Greg G as in Gifford, it ends up looking like
Okay.
Greg GG, but it's
Okay.
just
My
regular Greg.
my mistake. My bad.
So Greg G versus Greg S, just for
Yeah,
clarity.
That's right.
In case
That's
anybody
right.
misunderstood that.
Yes. And today we will be talking about a whole bunch of stuff, but specifically a personal injury law report, SEO report, best practices, et cetera, that has a lot of data that Greg just published and some of his other work in the auto vertical and in cannabis later on. We'll be talking about SEO best practices and what he learned, what was surprising. And then at the end, we'll be talking about the future of the SERP. We had quite a long and lively conversation in the virtual green room about such things, and we'll try and recreate that. We will not be talking about billionaire sociopaths, which is another engaging conversation we had, but we will shield you from that. So, Greg, Search Lab Digital is your agency. Is there anything you want to say about your background? You've been around a very long time, a beloved conference presenter and movie maven.
yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, I think most people out there probably heard of me because I've been in local about 20 years now and speak at all the conferences and do all the things. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing else to add to what you already.
What would you include in that list of do all the things? What does that mean, actually?
I'm on podcasts. I write
You're
on
just
websites.
just
I'm
you're
out
just
there. I'm very visible.
you're out there. Okay. All right. So why don't you tell us about this report and what the kind of high level findings are, and we'll drill into them.
Sure.
Why did you do it? What was it? Methodology and all of that.
So yeah, we really center a lot of our marketing around educating people, both potential clients and other marketers. And so what we wanted to do was draw a line in the sand because there's so many options out there. If you're a personal injury attorney, there are a ton of options of agencies that you can work with. And we work with a lot of car dealers. There's even more agencies that you can work with as car dealers. And while most people talk about the same best practices, you do have these random people that are like, oh no, you should do it this way, or ignore what this person says, they're wrong. We're right. We've figured it out. And so you also have all these people at conferences preaching about best practices and telling attendees, go do this, go do this, go do this, without really giving the backup of here's why this is important or this is what's proven. So we set out to do a research project, and we didn't want to try to assess weight to a ranking factor and say that this ranking factor is better than another, because statistically that's effectively impossible at this point in time. So what we wanted to do was let's just gather all of this data and then crunch the numbers and see, do the commonly shared best practices line up with what we're seeing out in the wild? So we have industry averages for 3 different verticals, and then we compared position 1 in the map pack to position 10 in the map pack to then see, okay, do the guys at number 1 follow best practices more closely than the guys at number 10? So we for each of the data points in the study, we have an average for everyone in the study, and then comparison from 1 to 10. And then methodology is important. So methodology wise, for the legal study, we ran the keywords accident lawyer, auto accident lawyer, car accident lawyer, car crash lawyer, dog bite lawyer, personal injury attorney, personal injury lawyer, and truck accident lawyer. So we ran those 8 phrases in the 20 largest US cities, and then used Places Scout to download all the data of the GBPs. So we went position 1 through position 20 in the local finder, as long as there were 20, because in some of the markets there might have only been 17 or 18. And then we end up with a total of 3,000 some odd GBPs that we can then get all of this data from. And Places Scout also does some analysis on the GBP landing page. So if it's a single location business, it's going to be the homepage. If it's a firm with multiple locations in a single website, it's going to pull the location landing page that the GBP website button linked to. And then we also used Ahrefs to analyze some of the link data related, since links do still have some influence. And then we got some other cool data about the value of ranking, and we can talk about that in a minute, from Ahrefs as well. So that's like a big study across 3 different verticals, because those of us that know SEO well enough to understand verticals are different, we wanted to share that knowledge with the rest of the world, because so much of the information that comes out nowadays is do this for local SEO.
Right. Sort of
And it
generic.
doesn't necessarily work the same from one industry to another.
For
A
sure.
methodology question, Greg.
Yeah, I was going to respond to you, Mike.
Yeah, this isn't going to be confusing at all.
On the keywords that you used in the keywords, did you include geomodifiers, or did you just set the center of the city?
Yeah, we
or
did
how
not.
did you
So we
determine?
did them as implicit searches, not explicit. So we did not have the geo modifier, but we had the location set to that particular city.
I see. So basically, however Google defined the centroid in that city or whatever.
Correct.
And for the people that are wondering, we'll link to your report so they can take a look at that themselves. Okay, great. So thank you for that explanation, very thorough. And so what did you determine? There are the generic best practices, local SEO recommendations that people talk about a lot. What did you see? What did you actually see?
We saw tons of stuff, and honestly, not really that much was surprising. One of the things that we did is, so each data point is kind of in a box, because, if we're looking at how many reviews are we seeing, there's an average for all of the thousands of profiles that were in the study. And then there's an average for position 1 and an average for position 10. And then there's a color on there. If the color is blue, then that is a factor that is commonly agreed to be a factor that influences ranking and visibility. If the color is green, it is commonly agreed that it doesn't influence ranking, but it does influence conversions. Like photos, as an example, would be a green box instead of a blue box. And then we also introduced red as a color, because the expectation is that if you are following best practices and doing better optimization than your competition, you're going to rank higher. And for a couple of the data points, we actually saw that position 10 was doing something better than position 1. So in that case, the data would be red. Also, interestingly enough, Morgan & Morgan was in here. No surprise to anyone that knows personal injury. They're a beast. We actually had to pull them out when we were doing the calculations, because they went so far beyond everyone else, especially when we're talking about the links.
So they skewed the averages.
Yeah, it completely skewed the averages. So we had to just remove them. And that was one of the reasons too, that when we were comparing position 1 to position 10, looking at links, we had to pull them out because they never rank number 1. They always get outranked, which, interestingly enough, for them being so aggressive with what they do in their marketing, they kind of aren't very good at SEO. Even though they do a lot of SEO activities, they're not doing the right things. So they had millions and millions of links, and it just completely skewed everything, because then position 10 had a much higher average number of links than position 1, just because of Morgan & Morgan. So we pulled them out and made things a little bit more realistic.
Although you could also explain that ranking in your study by the fact that maybe they got an office on the outskirts of town as opposed to the center of town, or whatever, right? Or maybe they chose an office someplace else, because your study really reflects the reality of the centroid, not the reality.
No, yeah, because that was one of the data
full
points
loaf of bread.
is how far from the centroid is the business. And so, we have an average distance from the centroid for everyone in the study, and then an average distance at position 1, and an average distance at position 10. And hold on, I can pull it up and tell you. Where is the centroids? Okay, it was like 3,600 profiles in the study. The average distance was 3.9 miles. But remember, we're pulling everything in all of the 20 largest cities.
That's all geographies.
So then, if I'm looking only at position 1, the average distance is only 0.7 of a mile.
Right.
And then
so
if we look at position 10, it's 1.6 miles. If I'm looking for car crash attorney and my location is set to some city that is not a sprawling metropolis like Chicago or LA or Dallas or Houston, then pretty quickly you're going to start getting these guys in the suburbs that are 20, 30 minutes away. And that's going to be a much bigger distance that draws down your average. But just looking at position 1 versus position 10, it's the position 10 guys are averaging twice as far from the centroid as position 1. So clearly that still has some sort of influence or effect.
Well, it speaks to the algorithm's focus on location and distance from a location for ranking. And so, but the variable is that on a phone, the user is the centroid, not the city, right, in that search. And so if a business is in a more lively area, that's going to get more PI searches, for whatever reason, it wouldn't matter if they're in the centroid of the city or not. If
Well,
they're
and the other
close
thing
to where the
too is
searchers are.
you tend to see most businesses or most attorneys tend to be in the downtown section, right? In the
Yes.
big tall office buildings
Well,
downtown.
in the old days, that was about proximity to the courthouse to some
Right.
degree.
But nowadays they tend to be downtown. And if I come and look at the car dealer stuff instead, it was something like the average for attorneys was less than a mile from the centroid. The average for dealers was like 4 or 5 miles from the centroid at position 1 because
So-
dealers aren't downtown. Dealers are further out from that centroid
Right. I mean,
in every market anyway.
the downtown corridors don't have the space for a dealer lot and so on and so forth. There's some very practical
And there aren't
reasons.
as many. There's so many lawyers in a downtown area that it's kind of like pizza shops, right? So you don't need to go as far to get 3 of them or whatever.
I don't know the answer to this, but I would have expected at this point, we're 25 years in, 20 years from Google Maps. I would have expected Google to make more subtle discriminations between verticals, right? So for certain kinds of things with physical locations like restaurants or cannabis stores, it's going to matter more than for an attorney. In our research, we've seen that people do care about local attorneys, the idea of that more than the physical difficulty of getting to somebody. But for an attorney, you can do most of your consultations on video or over a phone. You don't really need to be in their office. You might go in for an initial intake, but after that, it's all going to be electronic or, court appearance or something. And I would expect Google, that's a kind of a crude metric for them to use. And I would expect them to say, in this vertical, it matters more. In this vertical, it matters less. Service area businesses, it doesn't matter at all.
Well, they do that, Greg. They do it based on where they think the searcher is, and with a phone,
with mobile, sure.
And they also do it based on the density of the business in which you're searching. If there's a lot, they're going to draw a narrower thing. If there's fewer. But you're right. It's a very brittle algorithm that is scaled across the world. And what will change it is integration of Gemini with local search, as we're seeing on a map announcement yesterday, where people can say, or like I can say, look,
they can give them more information. That's the difference.
Right. And Gemini is capable of parsing that where I want the search radius to be 80 miles instead of 2 miles.
Yeah, I'm willing to drive
traveling out of town
half an hour or whatever.
So that's changing with AI. It is brittle, but it is still pretty functional. It's not as bad as it used to be. It used to be the city center was the thing. Now the phone is the thing, right?
It's one factor among many. So let's talk about some of those other things. What did you see with reviews, for example?
Okay, so the average review count for PI attorneys was only 362 reviews. Now I say only because the average for auto was significantly higher.
Thousands.
I wish I could have both of them scroll together at the same time.
You mentioned it was in the 2000s.
Yeah, so the average review count for car dealers was 2,195. And the average review count for car dealers ranking position 1 was 3,386 versus the average position 1 for personal injury attorneys at 555. So, it just highlights how different it is between different verticals. But yeah, so the average for PI attorneys, 362. The average at position 1 was 555. The average at position 10, 395. So then if the average is 362, that's lower average than position 10, which means all the guys that aren't ranking in the top 10 are just not getting enough reviews. Again, because we're not trying to assign weight to any particular element. We all agree that reviews have some influence, but we're not trying to say that you need to get this many reviews. What we're trying to prove is that having more reviews than your competitors is beneficial, which this definitely aligns with.
In our research in the personal injury subvertical specifically, we get users and we watch them search, we record them searching, and then we analyze those videos. We see the reactions. You really, unless you're in that top group, you're within striking distance of the top, which is 4.9 or 5 in some cases, you're not going to be considered. You have to be both within a narrow range of your star rating, and the volume has to be somewhere in some range that's close-ish. If it's like 4.8 and you know, 15
400
reviews
reviews, you had a shot
versus
at it,
versus
depending on the
yeah.
market.
But I mean, people will do that. We see people do that calculation. They're like, oh, this one has 4.7, but this many reviews, and this one has 4.6, but a lot more. And so they weigh these two things in their mind, the score and the volume of reviews. And you have to be in that top group, especially in such an aggressively competitive category, or people will disqualify you unless they know your brand.
Right. But review recency matters too. And I think that's something Darren's been talking about that a lot lately. Joy's been talking about that a lot lately. We've been talking about it a lot lately. If you have more reviews than your competitors and a much better score than your competitors, it doesn't necessarily mean you're automatically going to rank number one, because obviously there's a lot of other factors at play too. But specifically from the review element, we've seen a lot of people that have just kind of stagnated and not gotten many reviews. And there's a competitor that will have, 50% of the review count, but they're getting steady
They're
reviews on
fresher.
a regular basis, and they'll outrank that competitor because of that.
Right. I think that's all right. It's recency, star rating, and volume.
But I would say that in PI, if you're not 4.8, if you're not several hundreds of reviews, that's where you need to be.
For sure.
You need 400
Nobody's
reviews,
gonna
you
pay
need
attention
4.8.
otherwise.
And if you're not there, and you need to look at your competitors and be in that range. I mean, it's a fairly high bar. And one of the things we saw, though, was that so many lawyers are in that range, consumers sometimes then can't use their favorite metric, which is review counts and star ratings, and have to use some other means of making a quick decision, which I found interesting in the behavior research.
I think that the category findings were kind of interesting as well. So we did those 8 keywords, but realistically, we're looking at PI attorneys. So you would expect that is the primary category. But we saw 10 different unique primary categories across all of the 3,000 attorneys that were in the study. That's the number for the whole group. If I look at just the position 1 guys, there were only 2 different categories. At position 10, there were 3 different categories. But the thing that was crazy was seeing some of the things that people were picking across the whole corpus of all the categories. So not primary categories, but just if I look at every category of every profile in the study, throw it all in and deduplicate to get just one solid list of all the categories, there were attorneys that listed aviation consultant as a GBP category, which makes
as a secondary category, I would assume.
As a secondary category. There were quite a few that listed service establishment as a secondary category.
Well, they might do litigation somehow tied into aviation or airlines,
right? But that doesn't mean that you're an aviation consultant. You're choosing the wrong category.
They're misinterpreting what that means, I guess.
It could also
same thing with nursing home. We saw nursing home in there a lot, and clearly the assumption is you're
going to represent
with senior healthcare issues, but that doesn't mean you can't. It's physically impossible to be an attorney and a nursing home.
So the magical thinking around that is people are going to do these searches. I'm going to show up because I've got this category that, they're going to do some other search about finding nursing homes or whatever. And here I will appear because I've chosen this category and people will find me in that way. And I suspect they see it as some sort of competitive, advantage or something when it's misguided.
It could also be, though, that Google automates category collection across the internet and often aggregates their own categories that are not from within the category list within Google and sticks them on a listing automatically. So some of this variation could be due to that the vagaries of Google's collection of this data rather than the business actually trying to game the system. Google adds categories that they find across the internet, and some of those categories are not in the list that they give a business.
Right. So you can't physically select those categories.
Right. So they come from the Yellow Pages or wherever Google is scraping categories.
All right. So let's talk about anything else you want to say about reviews. Oh, let's talk about review response for a second. So they're for a while there were a bunch of
response stuff was kind of interesting. So we looked at the percentage of reviews that were not responded to. So of all the reviews that were in the study, how many of them just did not have a response from the business? The average is 35%. So more than a third of the reviews just get no response whatsoever. But then at position 1, it's 27% versus 37% at position 10. So the people at position 1 are much better at responding to reviews than the people at lower positions. Now, again, that's not something that influences ranking. but it could definitely influence your conversions.
Yeah, I mean, we see people who, in our studies, roughly speaking, and it varies from category, somewhere between 25 and 33% more in Europe are actually reading review text as opposed to just looking for review volume and star
Right.
ratings. And those people will look at recent reviews, and they also look at negative reviews as a crude generalization. And they will look at, many times, they will look at what the business owner said or what the business representative said and try and assess if it was a reasonable response or how crazy the person making the complaint is vis-a-vis the response. And so that does matter in certain cases where somebody has said something really bad. And, and I've heard people say, "Oh, there's like, lunatics out there, or here's that person is probably an outlier," and
Right.
discount it, you know. Mike, you
But
were
if
going to
it's
say something.
egregious enough, even if it's only one negative review out of 500,
Right.
It can
it
make a
can
difference.
queer the deal. I mean,
Yeah.
if it is a sexism or ableism or whatever, some sort of cross the line kind of negative review, doesn't matter. People
Right.
will reject that business.
Well, so let's talk about images and video. I don't know if you
Well,
track
also, one
video
more
at
thing
all.
about review responses. The
Yes,
average response time to reviews is 14 days. So people are waiting 2 weeks on average to answer their reviews,
it's quite a
which
long
I thought
time.
was interesting because, again, comparing to the automotive section of this study, the average was half that at just 7 days. And the guys at position one in automotive were answering reviews on average within 6 days of the review, versus in the attorney version of the study, position one is averaging 13 days.
Well,
So
in
it's like car dealers are answering reviews twice as fast as attorneys are for some reason.
in in
So let me
consumer
ask you a
ser-
question with some color here about review responses. If we're seeing, like Greg said, a third of users actually reading reviews and looking for responses to reviews, which one presumes increases engagement with a profile, and that engagement is likely somehow factored into Google's view of popularity and rank. So is there a knock-on effect of responding, not just in a pro forma way, but in a meaningful way that users actually read the responses and spend more time with them? Could there, would there, should there, might there be a knock-on effect that impacts visibility?
Yeah, I think so. I think too. And then you have to look at too is we're not saying with this study that the guys at position one that have more reviews are actively asking clients for reviews more often than the guys at position 10. You could also have just the effect of the fact that if you're in the top three in the map pack, you're likely getting more clients than the people that aren't showing in the top three, which leads to naturally more reviews. So it may not be a strategy that they're pursuing. It might just be due to the fact that because they rank at the top of the map pack, they're just getting more business.
Can I add to your work list? I have a suggestion for the next part of this study, which is
Sure.
to
Yeah.
partner with Curtis Boyd and see how many of these reviews he thinks are fake.
I actually talked to him about this at Local U in Nashville. And I was like, hey, man, we just did this study. And I would love to give you the list of all the guys next time around and see that exactly that. He was like, oh, yeah, that'd be so cool to do. And it'd be really
we
easy because I just give him the GBPs and he
Yeah,
can run it.
I mean,
It'd be cool.
what we saw in our most recent study suggests, I mean, we didn't do any analysis of the authenticity of the reviews, but given the inflation, the volume, the 4.9, 5.0, a lot of these guys had 5.0 ratings. There's rampant fraud,
For
I
sure.
think.
I've worked with
And
enough lawyers to know that some of them actually call the client and offer them money to take the review down, Greg, which is illegal, but they do it anyways. I mean, I've worked with enough lawyers to know that goes on amongst other who knows what
Yeah,
tactics.
for sure.
so let's talk about images and video. What did you see there? Is there anything interesting there?
Very good job bringing us back into the
Yeah.
neutral.
Yeah. Keep the cats
I'm
herded, right?
trying. I'm trying. I'm doing my best. Doing my
So, yeah, I
best.
mean, nothing really surprising on the photos. Average number of photos for a profile was 60. Uh, average for position one was 84. Average for position 10 was 74. Again, a conversion factor, not a ranking factor, but you would assume that the people that are more actively doing SEO are going to have more photos because either their internal team or their marketing partner knows that we need to do everything we can to optimize the user experience on the GBP. So let's get a lot of awesome photos. So, like, nothing surprising there. What was a little bit more surprising was the average age of the most recently uploaded photo. So how old is the newest photo in the gallery? So the newest photo from the public, so not uploaded by the business, but photo uploaded by the public, which could be a photo that they tagged as being at the location or a photo that they uploaded along with the review. The average age, 272 days.
Wow.
But then
Even
get
more
this.
concerning to me was the average most recent owner uploaded photo, which
Exactly.
was
The most recent owner
581
uploaded
days.
photo over a year and a half, actually, because 513 days.
Well, people probably have a kind of set it and forget it attitude about photos, right? I've got
For
my
sure.
25 photos and I don't need to do any more or something like that.
And
I
that
would
was,
think,
though, I told you we compare position 1 to position 10, and you're assuming position 1 guys are doing SEO better than the guys at position 10. But when we're looking at photos, the average age of the most recent owner uploaded photo, 513 days. The average age of the most recent owner uploaded photo for the position 1 firms was 581 days, so a longer period of time. And then the average age for the most recent owner photo at position 10 was 494 days, so almost 100 days more recent. But it's probably due to the guys at number 10 just trying everything they can to try to show up better. So they're just trying things a little bit harder. And like you said a minute ago, people are going for the things that are accessible to them. They're not going for the super techie things like, "Oh, let's upload some more photos." That's easy. Anybody can do that, whether they're working with an SEO partner or not.
all right, so let's talk about the super techie stuff because I think
Before you go
oh,
on, I just want
yes.
to talk about our research a little bit with photos. What we saw with photos is that users rely on them very heavily, which is one of the reasons LSAs are so popular. But they use them in two ways. One is they look for a gestalt of a photo. They look for sort of the overarching theme of a photo and will sometimes reject a firm if the photo demonstrates some value that they don't agree with. Let's say, for example, 3 big white dudes standing in front and all the secretaries standing in back. We've seen that cause rejections of a listing where they are not as
Women who want to see some female attorneys at a firm, that gives them confidence, right?
or
Somebody who's
people
going to
of
empathize
color
with them.
or all
Yeah.
sorts of things. I mean, so people, one, need to be sensitive to what their images are projecting. Two is back to the same thing about reviews. When I was working with photo company, we learned that engagement with photos did in fact increase rank. And so the only way to get engagement is to
Keep
keep
going.
putting photos up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That we actually saw an effect of engagement that was quite large.
Another thing that I found in this that was pretty interesting was looking at hours of operation.
Yes.
So between cannabis dispensaries and car dealerships, nothing surprising. You come look at attorneys, 95% of the attorneys at position number 1 are open 24/7. The average is 76% of all of the firms are open 24/7. Now, I am not saying this to support the commonly misunderstood conclusion from Joy's research. Joy did the whole thing about the openness update, that if you are searching after normal business hours, your
You're not-
rankings will be different between business hours when you're open and business hours when you're not. That is not to say that hours are a ranking factor. That is, in my opinion, the algorithm working as intended. If I'm looking for a dentist at 2 a.m., I probably have some sort of dental emergency, so it should show me the people that are open, not the people that are closed and better optimized during business hours. But people have taken this to mean that if you say you're open 24 hours, you rank better all the time. So, of course, all the PI attorneys have gone out and they
everybody's
all
doing
say they're
that.
open 24/7.
And
But this is
realtors
a
do
problem
that.
with Google's algorithm. I mean, they should make a distinction between emergency services and legal services. Now, maybe criminal law, when you're thrown in jail
Well,
at 2 a.m., you do need a lawyer that's open.
No, yeah, I disagree though, because if I get in an accident and it's 3 a.m. and I'm at the hospital with my spouse who almost died in a drunk driving accident and I need an attorney, it makes sense. I might want to see some preference to somebody that's actually open that I can talk to an attorney at 3 a.m. Although none of these guys have that, because all these guys have done is just get call answering services
right.
so that they can say, look, it's not just you're calling and leaving a message. You can call and actually get booked as a client. You just don't get to talk to an attorney till the next morning when the attorney gets to the office.
All right, so let's talk about the technical stuff, because that was an area that you were a little bit surprised by. A lot of folks following these SEO best practices around reviews and photos and categories and the like, but many people sort of dropping the ball on some basic technical stuff. Tell us about that.
Yeah, like the site speed stuff, the average is 3.2 seconds, so nothing really surprising there. The guys at position 10 tended to have slightly faster sites by like less than a little bit less than a second. There were still 5% overall that were not responsive websites. There were 8% of the sites of the 3,000 that don't have HTTPS, which was kind of surprising because that's been a factor for forever. Schema markup was also interesting. 36% of profile or of the attorneys that were in the study, 36%, so more than a third, don't have any local business schema markup.
And did that impact the ranking at all? I mean, it's not a ranking factor, but
Well, when I'm looking at the average across everyone, it doesn't matter where they rank. This is everybody position 1 through 20 and what they had it. When I actually break it down between position 1 and position 10, position 1, 33% didn't have schema. Position 10, 32% didn't have schema.
So it's a non-factor.
It's kind of a non-factor. It didn't really make a difference, although position 10 had a slight edge, but like schema's not a ranking factor really anyway.
Yep.
We another thing that was interesting is, so, you shouldn't mix multiple types of local business schema on the same website, because you're saying with local business schema, this is my business, this is my location, this is when I'm open, this is the type of business that I am. So you shouldn't have like 3 or 4 different types of competing local business schema on the same page. And 21% of the sites in the study had conflicting local business schema. And shockingly, at position 1, that number was 40%. So 40%
all these
of
various
the firms at
plugins to
position
WordPress.
1 because they're just throwing everything at Google and they're trying to put a million things there. And because schema is it's not going to penalize you if you do that. It's just not the right way to do it. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The content optimization stuff, I was really actually one of the most shocking things. If we're looking at word count, we saw an average word count of 2,283 words, which is, personal injury guys have really taken it like, let's just go more and more and more. So
these are blogs or what? Where is that appearing?
No, this is looking at the GBP landing page. So either the home page for a single location firm or the location landing page of a multi-location single website firm. So 2283 words. Then we can then look at the searched for keywords. So like personal injury attorney, if that's the search phrase. Is that phrase used in the various page elements that you're going to optimize on that page? So typically this is mostly homepage, because there are a couple of Morgan & Morgans in there and other firms that are a master monster conglomerate with one website and multiple locations. Most were just single location firms. So of the people that have the searched for keyword in the title tag of that GBP landing page, only 12% on average had the keyword in the title tag, versus 99% of the firms in the study had the keyword in the H1 heading. So it's like they'll optimize the H1 heading, but not the title tag. And like, if you look at position 1 versus position 10, 22% of position 1 had it in the title tag versus 14% having it in the title tag at position 10, versus 100% of the position 1 guys had it in the heading and 99% of position 10 had it in the heading. And then we looked at keyword in the meta description. Obviously doesn't play for ranking, but can influence conversions. 19% at position 1 had it in the meta tag or in the meta description versus 8% at position 10. And then image alt tags. Commonly, you're supposed to put the same keyword in the alt tags. 26% did it at position 1 versus only 14% at position 10. Then we also looked at, are they including the city? And Places Scout only looks at the title tag city, but 88% of the position 1 guys had the city that they're located in the title tag versus 75% at position 10 had it. So content optimization, a little bit all over the place, because they're clearly paying attention to their H1s, but they're not paying attention to title tags and alt text. So I thought that was a little bit weird too.
Well, what we saw in a category like self-storage is that title tags really matter. Coupon, discount, first month free in that category. And they may not matter as much from a click perspective for other categories like legal. Although people, free consultation, no fee unless we win, whatever, that kind of stuff would matter potentially.
Right.
Although one of the things we saw in an earlier legal study in employment law was the fact that title tags all look the same and users were unable to distinguish one from another because the title tags all looked exactly the same,
Yeah.
which caused other problems.
I mean, that's a problem that doesn't show up in the Places Scout data, but it's a real problem that we saw in our most recent study, where it was very hard for these firms to differentiate because they all had, 1,500 reviews and they were all 4.8 or 4.9. And it's always a white middle-aged guy. They say a lot of the same stuff and the websites all look the same. And so again, back to brand, back to sort of traditional media and other awareness, that's a differentiator that shows up in click behavior that you don't see from these optimization factors where everybody's doing the exact same thing and they all
Although
kind
we
of are
did see
indistinguishable.
one that stood out, a silver bullet, and that was using product schema for reviews, product review schema on your organic pages to get your organic pages to show up more.
Yeah, and that works. That's that you do stand out because everybody else isn't doing that.
Yep. Another interesting thing we saw, kind of more related to data tracking, was, for years, everyone has said you should put UTM tracking on your website link, because if no referral data gets passed, which happens a lot on mobile, that traffic gets classified as direct in analytics instead of organic. 48% of the firms in the study did not have UTM tracking on their website link. Of the 52%, so the remaining basically half of the firms in the study that did have UTMs, 33% of them didn't have the medium set to be organic. They had it set to be social or something else that was incorrect. So half of the people aren't tracking it correctly, and about half of the ones that are tracking it or attempting to track it are tracking it wrong and screwing up their data in Google Analytics, which I thought that was interesting. And then when we get to the link stuff, I thought the link stuff was pretty cool. So this is where we got some help from Ahrefs. So the average number of links is 16,648 links, but that's only from an average of 562 unique websites. Because as you guys know, you get diminishing returns in getting multiple links from the same URL. So it's more important to get links from a diverse set of websites. And so we saw a kind of a big gap there. In fact, the biggest gap that we saw in the study, if we look at the number of links versus the number of domains, there was one firm that had a gap of 860,000, which means they had, if you look at the number of links that they had versus the number of sites that those links came from, they had a gap of 860,000, which was nuts. And then we actually had a call out there about the whole Morgan & Morgan thing. So remember, if I pull Morgan & Morgan from the study, I mentioned earlier that I pulled it because it skewed the numbers. So if the average number in the study without Morgan & Morgan is 16,000 links, Morgan & Morgan's website has 105 million links pointed at it from 6,000 different domains.
But yet they don't rank number one in many of these
But they don't rank
cases.
number one because they're doing garbage SEO. They're getting a bunch of links from just crappy websites that Google's
I
not
see.
going to assign any value to.
And is that and are all those links? I mean, you didn't sort of track where those links go to.
No, like at this point, I was like, all right, let me just go run them through Ahrefs just to see. And you just start looking at the URLs, and they're just all spamtastic things that are not going to be valuable. And then the other thing that was really cool is Ahrefs, a lot, hopefully people watching or listening have used Ahrefs before, but it's not just a link tool. It's also a keyword research tool and a visibility tracker and all kinds of other things. So one of the things that the Ahrefs API allowed us to do was to look at the average number of keywords that each firm ranked for. So we take a URL, and according to the Ahrefs crawling data, here's the number of keywords that site ranks for. So then we can break down the overall average, and then we can break down the average of, like, the overall average was the average firm ranks for 4,700 keywords, 4,717. But then the average position 1 is 6,134 versus the average position 10 at 4,389. But then we can look at how many of those keywords rank in the top 3, and then how many in 4 to 10, and how many in 11 to 20. So all that's in there. It's cool. You can go look at it if you're interested and you're watching or listening. The coolest part about this, though, is Ahrefs then calculates what your organic traffic is worth. So basically they say, all right, if you rank for from 17 keywords, they know what each of those keywords are, and then they can come back and use the Google Ads API to say, okay, if you rank number 1 for dog bite lawyer,
Right.
then that click probably would cost $150. if you are buying that click with an ad. So then it can say, all right, you are this position and you rank number one. So you get whatever percentage they've decided. Usually people are like, you get 18% of the clicks if you're number one. So they can figure out how much traffic you are getting. So they say for this keyword, you rank number whatever, which means at that percentage, you're getting X amount of traffic. We multiply that by what the paid search click would cost, and you get an overall cost of what your traffic would cost, right? You following me?
Yep.
So the average cost or the
No,
cost
Greg, could you
equivalent-
tell us again?
Really?
What, you want me to clarify it?
No.
So basically
joking.
what this number is telling you is here's how much traffic you're getting. And if you were going to buy
If
the
you
same
if you were
amount
an
of traffic
advertiser,
from paid
this
search,
yep.
you pay this much money. The average firm would have to spend almost $8.5 million a month in paid search to get the same amount of traffic that they're getting organically.
Well, so that whole thing strikes me as like an SEO selling tool,
And it gets even better because we can compare what's the average cost for the guys at number one versus the average cost for the guys at number 10 to then say, if you're ranking number 10, you would have to spend this much money in paid search to get the same amount of traffic you'd be getting for free if you rank number one. So that's kind of giving you the value of good SEO means you don't have to spend this much money in paid search. And that number was $245,187 a month is what it's worth
Quite
to
a bit
rank number
larger.
one over number 10.
Quite a bit larger than most SEO budgets.
And what's really interesting too is if I look at the car dealer version of the study, it's almost exactly the same number.
That suggests that the number is meaningless if it's identical.
I mean, it's not perfectly identical, but it was like 240 car dealers. So it's just showing that there is significant value in ranking number one versus ranking number 10, which none of us are surprised about, right? Like, wow, big surprise there. Thanks, Greg.
So is there anything else of a technical nature that's sort of worth calling out right now? There doesn't have to be, but I just want to
I
make
don't
sure.
think so. I mean, like we had site speed and stuff in there, but like none of that was
You talked about that.
that shocking or that interesting.
You talked about that.
We looked at, I mean, nothing that I didn't really kind of mention quickly.
I used to be a lawyer years ago. I was a lawyer for about 10 years. I did litigation. And, when I ask these questions, I feel like I'm in a deposition. Is there anything else that you haven't told us that's relevant to this question? But anyway, okay, so let's move on because we could keep going for another extended period of time, but we've been talking for a while and I want to get to a couple other things. So there's a bunch of inferences and recommendations that come out of this, obviously, that are sort of supportive of some of the best practices advice and maybe some that kind of add some nuance to it. Let's pretend I'm a young SEO and I read this report. It's really cool, gives me a lot of insight, or there are other reports that have similar kinds of findings. How much can I then take what's in here and generalize across categories, across verticals? Can I just say, here's a template for all SEO best practices, regardless of the category? What do I need to understand about the differences between
I think
categories?
that would be a bit of a leap to then say this works for every vertical, but that's why we did 3 different verticals. So anybody reading this, I would encourage them to get the auto version and then the cannabis version. The cannabis version we're releasing in January just because it's about to be holidays and we don't want to get lost in the noise. But when you look at all 3 together, that's when you can really start to make the conclusions of, okay, this thing clearly matters because I can see across all 3 verticals, the averages are wildly different between the 3, but you can still see the story that comes out that the guys at position 1 are always doing more of or better of whatever tactic it is than the guys at position 10. It's not to say that reviews are more important than schema, which is more important than photos, which is more important than Google Posts. We're not trying to do any of that. We're just trying to say, do the guys at position 1 do it better than the guys at position 10? And in nearly every case, they do. So then I think you can make the conclusion that this particular tactic or activity should have some positive influence, assuming I'm doing all of it. Because I think one of the things that I've run into a lot speaking at all the conferences that I do is I'll list out all the best practices in my 40-minute session. Here's all the things you need to do that are going to be the most influential. And then a year later, I'll see somebody that'll be like, man, I did it and it didn't make a difference. And I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, I followed the thing that you said about reviews. Okay, cool. Did you do the other stuff too? Well, no, I just did reviews because those are the easiest. Kind of like we were talking about earlier. People are going to use the things that are most generally accessible and they don't get into the technical nerdy stuff. And I think the real story here is the numbers are different between each vertical, but the general idea of you need to have the right categories, you need to have the right hours, you need to have schema, you need to optimize your title tags and meta description. Like all of that messaging is that really does matter. It's just how far you take it depends on the vertical that you're in.
Well, what
I would
go
add,
ahead.
Greg, that those things are table stakes in the sense,
Exactly.
Mhm.
and that the only way to determine what the differentiators are is to do the kind of research we're doing, where we understand that in storage, here's what people are looking for, and in legal, here's what people are looking for, so that understanding that differentiator allows them to do all the basics that Greg's talking about, all the table stakes, but then whatever it needs to be 5% more attractive or 10% more attractive
Yeah,
to the user.
so you guys obviously know that Yext bought Places Scout, and they're
Yes.
doing some cool stuff with the Places Scout functionality. And one of the data things that they were talking to me about the other day is they're looking at reviews at just as one element, and how people kind of the angle that you guys are taking. What resonates the most with potential customers in each vertical? And in some verticals, it's the review count. Like, do you have more reviews than everybody else? In others, it's, do you have a higher score? I don't care what your count is. I want a higher score. In other ones, it's people are going in and reading the reviews, and they don't care about how many reviews you have or what your review score is. They want to see what people are saying in the reviews. And, do pictures matter? So they're starting to do this kind of research like you guys, where it's not what matters to Google, but what matters to the customers. Because I think that's an element that a lot of people tend to forget. We're all chasing the algorithm. We're all doing the things that we're doing for SEO, but we're not paying attention to what the customer experience is and what matters to the customer.
Is that using the Places Scout tool, or is that some other methodology that they're doing?
It's been a couple of weeks since I talked to him about it. I don't
Mhm.
want to say the wrong thing, but I know
Sure.
that it involves the Places Scout technology. I know part of it is they've got all the people that are on Yext and they can access all those profiles, but for the user, like what resonates the most and what matters the most, I don't remember what their methodology was.
You've got the three verticals: auto dealers, cannabis, and PI attorneys. Just from your recollection, was there anything that sort of jumped out where there was a big difference in any given vertical, or a meaningful
Like
difference?
from one to another, or just within a
Well,
vertical?
like in this area, this element was more influential than this. It didn't really matter over here, or people were, or the impact of something was different in one of the verticals. Is there anything like that, or is
Yeah,
it
I mean, we
direction?
didn't we didn't really have anything in there to assess the weight of one element over another.
Mhm.
So it was more the differences that we saw were like what we talked about with the review count. Like car dealers have significantly more reviews than attorneys, and cannabis dispensaries are more than attorneys, but still significantly less than car dealers. Car dealers answer their reviews more quickly. Car dealers have way more photos than either of the other verticals have. Car dealers' websites were significantly longer loading time than dispensaries or attorneys, but car dealers need bigger pictures because you're trying to sell $1,000 plus car. You're not going to do it with a small photo. So there's things that are different, but not really that different. It's more just the idiosyncrasies of each vertical.
Well, what's right? I mean, what's meaningful is that you're competing within a vertical. You're not competing between verticals. I mean, car dealers don't compete with cannabis dispensaries, and so it's you're being judged by Google and by users on the terms
Oh,
of
maybe.
the.
Should I buy it? Should I get a new Should I get a reefer, or should I buy a new car? It's kind of the consumer makes a decision.
Do people use that language? Reefer? Is that
Reefer?
I don't know.
reefer madness?
I don't think since that movie people have called it reefer.
Blunt, how about blunt, or
But yeah,
I
they
think that
still, yeah.
I think that's language from the 70s.
well, just shows you last time I smoked. What can I say?
50. That's like 50 years ago. Yeah.
That was the last time.
I mean, we're bumping up against time, but let's talk real quickly about, if we can do this quickly, about the sort of the future of the SERP, because I think behind all of this is this looming. The search results page is changing with all the modules and AI and everything, and ads everywhere, and deceptive, labeling of ads versus organic. What are your thoughts about where the SERP is going and how that is impacting user behavior or ranking visibility? I mean, we talked about organic being going way down below the fold. You also spoke about how if you rank in number one, that's worth X amount of money versus what you would have to pay to buy that ad. Google is making it harder to be visible as organic marketer and forcing more and more people, especially in local, into sort of local services ads because there's so much attention paid to those. So what do you think is going on? Make some bold statements about and how marketers should respond.
I would caution everyone jumping on the AI train to not make bold claims that are untrue. There's so many people out there saying they've cracked the code on AI and how to get you to show up in AI, and it's just all BS.
You're talking about
Also,
AI overviews or ChatGPT?
both, like
Okay.
either or. I also hate that people are trying to make geo be the term for that because
Yes.
geo already means other things in local and
Yes.
other things outside of marketings. Like let's pick if we want to call it something different. I'm not one of those guys saying it's just SEO, let's call it SEO. Like I'm cool with it if we want to call it something different because it's kind of expanded, but let's not call it something that gets confusing. Kind of like Google calling Google My Business Google Business Profile, not thinking of the fact that GBP as the abbreviation is also the abbreviation for money in the UK,
Yeah,
which is
right.
like dumb. But yeah,
I got
think,
it. I got it. New acronym. BO, brand optimization.
right. I
BO.
would love
Well,
that. That would be so fun for jokes for forever.
there's AEO, AIO, SXO, SBO, SEO. Yesterday, another one occurred to me that I had not seen, and I just want to flood the zone with acronyms.
What is it?
DEO, Decision Engine Optimization.
And see, the problem is it's all of us marketers trying to call it something new. And they don't realize that they're just confusing the hell out of all the businesses out there because now you've got some people calling it AIO, which is also the abbreviation for AI overviews.
Yes.
And then you've now got people calling it DEO and GEO and
No,
all of these other
I think
things.
I just introduced that. I mean, if I am truly the one who coined that, I don't necessarily think I am. I just introduced that into the world yesterday, so we'll see.
Right,
if
but
it
even
makes
still,
the
my
list.
point is, if we can't even agree on what to call it, how are our customers supposed to buy it from us?
Right,
Because now
exactly.
you're going to have somebody that's like, I want to show up in ChatGPT, and one agency is going to be selling them Geo, and another one's going to be selling them AIO, and they're both going to be saying it's different stuff when really it's the same thing. So there's all that. But I think really just about any SERP that you look at nowadays, desktop wise, at least, because obviously on mobile, there's no organic above the fold because you get a couple of listings. But even on desktop, organic almost doesn't exist above the fold. It's just ads and LSAs and everything pushing it all down.
People also ask.
People also
People
ask.
also search. People
then,
also
like,
think. People also question.
When I was in Germany for the conference a month ago, they've got two different map packs. You start scrolling, you get ads at the top, then you get the map pack with 3 results, then you get a couple of organic results, then you get a second map pack with 3 more results. And in my brain, I'm like, well, this is crazy. And immediately the SEO in me goes, well, let's go check this out. And if you go click the local finder on the top 3, my supposition would be, all right, the first map pack is 1 through 3, and the second map pack is 4 through 6. But that's not the case. If you go look at each local finder, it's 2 separate different lists of businesses, which makes no sense. So I'm glad I'm not a local SEO in Germany, right?
I would add, Greg, just yesterday or the day before, we started seeing in PI particularly, but in many legal categories, the inclusion of the local AIO, which is sort of a variation of the AIO that gives you a summary and then a local listing in a carousel type arrangement.
And there's no rhyme or reason to what's getting chosen because it doesn't match to the map pack in most of the cases that we've seen.
And in the one I
sometimes
saw
it's
today,
like guys with really bad reviews get listed in the AI map pack, which makes no sense.
And also in the AIOs, they're referencing GBP as a source, which is also interesting. But what I saw today was LSA, AIO overview with 1 local listing, and then 1 organic listing, then a people also ask, and then another organic listing, and then a people also search for. So in mobile, you had to scroll literally 7 screens to get to anything beyond the second organic listing. And there were you had to click into the AI overview to see more than 1 local pack listing. And so clearly, I mean, you didn't ask me for it, but I can give it to you. My bold, conclusion is they're driving everybody towards LSAs and towards ads.
Of course, that's not a bold conclusion. It's Google is realizing.
In fact, it's a very cowardly conclusion, Mike.
Google is realizing.
Well, for a very cowardly conclusion.
No,
they're basically stealing the AIOs aren't stealing it. The ads are.
No, well, because the general public, and I say this in conference presentations all the time, the general public tends to think of Google as like a free utility. It is a free tool to help you find stuff. It's not at all, and it never has been. Google's a business, and they have shareholders, and Google needs to make money. So ads are just the nature of how things are going to go. I think that's the only reason they haven't gone full AI mode all the time, because they haven't figured out yet where
Yes.
the ad placements are going to work and how they're going to legitimize switching to AIO if it means they're cutting their revenue massively, which they're not going to want to do. As soon as they can figure out how to monetize the ads in AI mode, it's going to be AI mode all the time. That's all you get.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I think that AI mode and AI overviews will merge, or AI mode will supplant AI overviews. I mean, the way that I think Robbie Stein, the Google VP, who's been on the circuit lately, I think his last name is Stein. I may be wrong. Sort of implied in his interview with Lenny Rashinsky that AI overviews was a kind of a rushed product to respond to ChatGPT, and it was kind of this half-baked thing. Now it's improved, and AI mode is the better version. That's the thing that they're really aiming for. But I think, they can certainly inject ads into AI mode. There's just a bunch of different ways they could do that. The question is, can they equal the monetization they're getting out of the traditional SERP? And we talked before the session started about the SEER report on AI overviews and click-throughs. And one of the things that they found was that in paid ads, we're seeing reduced click-throughs when AIOs were present. And so that there was some potential decline in monetization going on, even though Google had just had this $100 billion. So that's what Google has to figure out. They have to figure out, and Liz Reed, who's the head of search, was saying, well, we're seeing somewhat reduced monetization, but we see more queries, so it's going to even out, something like that. So they're clearly very actively playing with all these things to try and find a way to sort of bring the user experience into this AI world, and at the same time not, cannibalize their ad clicks too much.
And I think, right now ChatGPT is kind of the winner in the AI stuff, because it just is kind of the ubiquitous term that everybody is going to ChatGPT because it's out there. But I think if I had to put money on it right now, I'd put my money on Google winning the dominance war of AI search, because Google has all of the map and location data already in the Google ecosystem. And ChatGPT, there's no way ChatGPT is going to go redo all of the map data of the entire world to figure out its own version of local. It's going to have to do grounded searches to Google or Bing to get that real world location data. And I just don't see that in the end, when we get to whatever point that we're all AI all the time, I just don't see how ChatGPT could compete with Google because of the location data that Google has.
Clearly, it's time for my nap.
Right?
I think that that's true. Mike and I have talked about this a lot. The natural advantages Google has. The other thing that Google has is a search monopoly and products that have billions of users that they're jamming. They're putting Gemini everywhere, into Workspace, into Chrome, into Maps, and they're
And they
insinuating it.
understand what users want a little better. I mean, one of the big changes with AI overviews now is the speed with which they are delivered. So, if I'm asking just a general informational query, I could go to ChatGPT, which I was doing earlier in the year. But in the last 3 months, I've switched my behavior to Google because I can get the answer 3 times faster, or 5
Yeah.
times faster, or 8 times faster. So they have other advantages beyond just their search monopoly.
Well, and they
I mean,
can
they have
subsidize everything with their ad revenue.
Yeah.
they can
exactly.
subsidize with their ad revenue, and they understand what people are looking for. In the case of what are the heights of these two actors or whatever
Well,
I'm
and
looking
also
for.
And then there's the testing ability too. You could take a subset of a half of a half of a half of a percent of Google users, get this new test of something with AI overviews, and Google has built-in user test functionality that ChatGPT doesn't really have.
right.
And the ability to change results to match that. I mean, ChatGPT is a not a particularly deterministic system, so probabilistic.
Well,
by
and
nature.
Google has a history of fighting spam, which it does unevenly, but it still has the experience that ChatGPT does not have.
Lots of advantages.
Yeah, so there
I
are a whole
agree.
bunch of advantages. I mean, it would be very frustrating to me to see Google eliminate its competition in the AI world. That would not be a healthy thing for the ecosystem. But I do agree that they are very well positioned. Siri is now going to be powered by Gemini, apparently, which is an unfortunate thing, I think. But they are very well positioned for the long term, in ways that I mean, the only other company in the AI space that's really competing with them is ChatGPT, not Grok, not Claude, not DeepSeek, not, Copilot
Anthropic.
even, not, yeah, Claude. I mean, Claude, there was an article, not to digress too much, I think in the Wall Street Journal about how Claude is going after this enterprise B2B model, which may ultimately be a much smarter thing than trying to do the B2C thing that ChatGPT is doing. Okay, any final remarks that either of you want to make about any of this
I will
stuff?
defer to Greg G for final remarks.
I think that, like the question came up earlier is, could you as a young SEO take the data from this study and make some conclusions? I think the important thing is the study, not the data in the study, in that if you're a younger person, not necessarily age-wise, but in your career, you're just starting out in SEO, I think it's incredibly important to play with stuff and break stuff and tinker and figure things out on your own and run your own tests to see what works with the verticals that you're working with, instead of just blindly following the advice of the experts that you follow online. Because we all know there are tons of things that are best practices that are preached about that we've had clients where you could do that all day long and it's not going to move the needle at all. And I think that's where a lot of people get SEO wrong, is it's a lot more nuanced than that. And you really need to test things yourself to figure out what's working, so you're not wasting 20% of your time doing things that absolutely won't matter.
And the follow on to that is that we're in a time of incredible change, and it's very dynamic, and you have to constantly be on top of this. There's not some set of immutable principles that will never change that you can just rely upon. You have to be constantly educating yourself and trying things, and as you say, kind of hands-on experimentation. All right. Well, Greg Gifford, thank you very much for all your time and your insights. And we will have you on in the future again. Mike, do you want to add anything to that?
No, just thanks to Greg for joining us on such short notice and having such a great study. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's always a blast to talk to you guys. I'll come back anytime.
All right, great. Well, and keep listening, everybody. Our newsletter will be free next month, so sign up for that if you haven't, because you've been dissuaded by the paywall. We're taking it down, and just tell your friends about the podcast and Near Media. We'll see you next time.